Hi. Let's get back into this oh so awkward dinner party, shall we? Here we go. Let's see. Dad had been insulting Matt and Mike about their potential music career. Um, and let's see. We found out that Dad used to be in a band. What? Let's see. Dad laughs a little and says, hold on. Yeah, Dad laughs a little and says, right, but then adds, although I am a little curious. This is obviously not a home done demo, and I happen to know studio time is cost prohibitive for most bands. Matt and Mike interrupt him with a slamming hard high five. And while I'm getting uptight about my dad asking them questions about money of all things, my mom is fumbling all over herself trying to sweep away my dad's big paw prints. When Rick and I met, he was playing in a band. Poached salmon was suddenly swimming down the wrong hatch. And while I'm choking, Lynetta's bugging out her raccoon eyes, saying, You played in a band? What did you play? Clarinet? No, honey, my mom says, trying to hold it all together. Your father played guitar. Guitar? Cool, Matt or Mike says. Rock, country, jazz? Country, my dad says, which is nothing to scoff at, boys. Dude, we know. Total respect, man. And when our band looked into getting a demo made, it was astronomically expensive. Getting a demo made around here, I didn't even know there was a facility. Matt and Mike are still grinning. There's not. So, where'd you go and how'd you afford it? My mom whacks him under the table again, so he says, I'm just curious, Patsy. Matt and Mike lean in. We did it ourselves. This right here. You did it yourselves. That's impossible. He's looking almost mad about it. How'd you get the gear? Mom kicks him again, but Dad turns on her and says, Stop it, would you? I'm just curious. Matt or Mike says, It's cool, Mrs. Lotsky. He smiles at my dad and says, We kept cruising the internet and the trades looking for a deal. Everyone's blowing out their old analog gear for digital because that's the move everyone else has made. Digital, if you want to know our opinion, is weak. You lose too much of the waveform. There's not enough fat to it, and obviously we like it beefy. My granddad puts a finger up and says, but a CD is digital, so exactly. But that's the last and only step we'll compromise on. It's just a necessity of being part of the industry. Everyone wants CDs, but the multi-track and mixdown and two-track analog is analog. And we can afford it, Mr. Lasky, because we got used gear and we've been saving up our pennies since we were 12 years old. He grins and says, You still play? We could, lay down some of your tunes if you want. My dad looks down, and for a second I couldn't tell if he was going to get mad or cry. Then he sort of snorts and says, Thanks, but that's not me anymore. Which was probably the only honest thing my dad said all night. After that, he was quiet. He tried to plaster up a smile now and then, but man, underneath it, he was broody. And I was feeling kind of bad for him. Was he thinking about the good old days playing in a band? I tried to picture him wearing cowboy boots and a cowboy hat, with a guitar strapped across his shoulder, playing some old Willie Nelson song. He was right. It just wasn't him. But the fact that it ever had been made me feel even more like a stranger in a strange land. Then, when the night was over and the bakers were piling out the front door, something else strange happened. Julie touched my arm, and for the first time that night she was looking at me. It was that look, too, channeled directly and solely at me. She says, I'm sorry I was so angry when we first came in. Everyone had a good time, and I think your mom is really nice for inviting us. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. I just stood there like a moron staring at her. Bryce, she says, touching my arm again, Did you hear me? I'm sorry. I managed a nod, but my arm was tingling and my heart was pounding, and I felt myself pulling towards her. Then she was gone, out the door and into the night, part of a chorus of happy goodbyes. I tried to catch my breath. What was that? What's wrong with me? My mother closed the door and said, "There, now what did I tell you? That is one delightful family. Those boys are nothing like I expected. Lynetta, why didn't you tell me they were so charming?" "They're drug dealers, is what they are." Everyone turned to my father and dropped their jaws. "What?" said my mother. "There is no way those boys could afford to buy recording gear like that." He glared at Lynetta. "Isn't that so?" Lynetta's eyes looked like they were going to pop right out of her head. "Rick, please, you can't just make accusations like that." "It's the only thing that makes sense, Patsy. Believe me, I know how musicians are. There is no other explanation for this." Lynetta shouted. "I happen to know for a fact that they don't use or deal. Where do you get off saying something like that? You are such a two-faced, condescending, narrow-minded—" She calls her dad a nasty name. I'm not going to repeat it. There was a split second of silence. Then he smacked her. Smack! Right across the cheek. That put my mother in his face like I had never seen her, and sent my sister screaming insults over her shoulder as she ran down to her room. My heart was pounding. Lynetta was right, and I almost got in his face too and told him so, but then my granddad pulled me aside and we both retreated to our own little corners of the house. Pacing around the room, I had the urge to go talk to Lynetta, to tell her, sorry, to tell her, now I lost my place. Imagine that. Let me see. I almost had the urge to go talk to Lynetta, to tell her she was right, that Dad was out of line. But I could not, but I could hear her though through the walls, crying and screaming while my mom tried to calm her down. Then she stormed out of the house to who knows where, and my mom took up with my dad again. So I stayed put. And even though the earth quit quaking around 11 o'clock, there were tremors out there. I could feel them. As I lay in my bed staring out the window at the sky, I thought about how my dad had always looked down on the Bakers, how he'd always put down their house and their yard and their cars and what they did for a living, how he had called them trash and made fun of Mr. Baker's paintings. And now I was seeing that there was something really cool about that family. All of them. They were just real. And who were we? There was something spinning wickedly out of control inside this house. It was like seeing inside the Baker's world had opened up windows into our own, and the view was not a pretty one. Where had all this stuff come from? And why hadn't I ever seen it before? Hmm, interesting. Next chapter, we're going to get Juliana's side of the story on how this whole dinner thing went. Interesting. All right, I'll see you next time. Be safe, healthy, and kind to one another. See ya.